Hello, my name is Emily Kane. I am a member of the Maine State Senate, representing Senate District 30, which includes 21 communities in Penobscot County. Today is Friday, June 21st, and we are filming this Terp Talk at the University of Maine in Orono, which is right in the middle of my district. I've been serving in the legislature in Maine for 9 years. I first ran when I was 24 years old, and at the time, I had no idea that I would be looking ahead to what would really become an early career in Maine politics. But I have to ask myself, why didn't I think that? Why didn't I know that this was what I could be doing in my life? I majored in music at the University of Maine, and I earned my master's degree in higher education at Harvard. But politics was still not on my radar screen. I don't come from a family in politics, and it's not something that I necessarily thought I would be good at. But as an undergraduate at the University of Maine, what I found myself attracted to were things and projects and organizations that were getting things done. It was all about, how do I see a situation and change it for the better? So whether that was co-founding a women's a cappella group called Renaissance, or whether it was in the Honors College, being on the student advisory board and working very hard to make sure that the Honors College could transition from program to college in a way that wasn't just a name change, but rather something more significant. It was during that time as an undergraduate that I found I really could engage in something when I was focused on getting something done. During my master's degree was when I discovered public policy. I wanted to study, how do you make sure more people can afford college and make sure that college is something that is good for them and good for our country and good for our states and our regions. And as a master's student, I took a course in economics of higher education. Sounded like it might be a little bit boring, actually. Turns out I was wrong. That course, combined with a course in access and success policies in higher education, really led me to see a path to public policy. All of a sudden, I didn't necessarily think the most impactful way to make a difference in higher education was to necessarily just be a higher education administrator. All of a sudden, the world of public policy opened up to me as I learned about the role of Pell Grants and affordability, the role of Hope and Lifetime Learning Tax Credits at the federal level on making sure families could afford college, middle-class families, and making sure that efforts like research and development investments were linked to job creation. I finished my master's degree and was talking with my state senator at the time, Mary Cathcart, and her husband, and I was telling them about this passion for public policy that I had. And I thought, I really could use help getting a job. I asked Mary if she would look at my resume, and her husband, Jim, said, "Have you thought about running for office?" Now, the answer to me was, not really. Maybe someday. I might think about running for the school board someday. And Jim and Mary looked right at me and said, "How about now?" That was in May of 2004 when they asked me that question. In June, I graduated with my master's degree. July, I started a part-time job here at the University of Maine on July 1st. July 6th, I became a candidate for the legislature. August 15th, I got married. And November 2nd, I got elected. And that was an amazing year. I don't recommend doing all of those major life events in a 6-month period, but for me, it couldn't have worked out better. After I got elected, I went to the State House for the first time, and I found myself in an environment where I was the youngest member elected that cycle. And not only was I the youngest member, but I was in an environment where there were less than 30% of the people elected to the Maine legislature were women. We were only on our second woman at that time who was the president of the Senate, and we still had only had one woman Speaker of the House. It was amazing to me because I grew up in a world full of strong women, and at the University of Maine, I often had strong women role models in my life. So I started to think, why is this happening? I started to look into why women do or do not run for office. And what I learned is that I'm actually a statistic. I just told you this great story about how I came to run for office at 24. I was a music major, and That might seem like it's a unique story. Turns out it's not. What I learned was that most women don't ever think about running for office. And if they do, they think, well, there's probably somebody more qualified. In fact, the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University spends all of their time working on this question of women running for office. Currently, across this country, only about a quarter of state legislators are women. At the federal level, only about 20% of the Congress, the U.S. Congress, is made up of women, and in fact, the United States Senate has reached its all-time high in number of women at 20 out of 100. And we've never had a woman president. The state of Maine has never had a woman governor. And all those things make you think, why is this happening? When women make up more than half of college-going students, women make up more than half of the population. There's a problem here, and something needs to be done about it. And as you look at the research at the Center for American Women in Politics, what you learn is that for most women, they have to have happen to them exactly what happened to me, which is someone needs to ask them. And they need to ask them not just once, but more than once. Because when you take men and women and you ask the men, will you run for office someday? Most of them will say, yeah, probably. You ask women and they'll say, I'd love to help. And when I got asked to run for office, the day Mary and Jim asked me, my first response was, I'm sure you're asking a lot of people. Let me know how I can help. And their response, thankfully, was, we weren't joking. We want you to run. Please say yes. Since becoming a member of the Maine legislature, I've become involved in organizations that work to change the number of women in politics and increase them. Sometimes that means meeting with young students, 7th, 8th grade girls or younger, or meeting with Girl Scouts or getting involved with Brownies and saying to them, make sure you know you could run for office. Make sure you know that you should be the person that says yes when you're asked to run. And in fact, don't be asked. Just show up and say, I'm going to run for office. It's about changing what the face of politics looks like. And for me, that's all the more reason to stay involved. Research also shows that women are more effective as legislators. That Center for American Women in Politics group has shown that women are better at collaborating, bringing legislation together, and making sure that legislation actually gets accomplished, gets something done, and makes a difference for people. But it's important to remember that you don't have to have a specific list of qualifications to run for office. In the case of the state of Maine, all that's required is that you are a U.S. citizen, that you live in the state of Maine, and that if you're running for the state house, you have to be at least 21 per the Constitution, and if you're running for the state Senate, you have to be 25. That's it. You don't have to have run a business large or small, or you don't have to have been a teacher for a certain amount of time. You don't have to be retired. You don't have to be fill in the blank. Those are all the qualifications you need. And so I think it's really imperative for us that we reach out beyond the people who think they should run for office, beyond the people who just studied political science or who went to law school, but rather to say we need people who are mothers and fathers, who are business owners and teachers, who have been poor or who come from privilege. We need all of those people to be at the table. And most of all, right now, we need more women. Because when we have more women at the table, we're going to have, I think, a better conversation about communities, about healthcare, about education, and about business and economic development, making sure we're growing all parts of our economy for all types of people who are involved. So one of the questions I often get asked by little kids when they ask tough questions is, well, what do I have to do? How do I get to do what you do? And what I always tell them is, get passionate about something. Make sure you're following an issue, follow your heart, follow a topic you believe you can make a difference in, and that will lead you to running for office. I don't always recommend planning your campaign plan 20 years in advance, when you're 10 years old, but I do think it's important for particularly adults to set examples for young girls and young boys that they should think about making a difference through public service. In the state of Maine, we're at an interesting place where we continue to have a lot of women participating in politics, more than other states. Actually, Maine has a little bit higher amount, but we don't necessarily have women who are rising to the very top. As I said earlier, we've now only had 3 women Senate presidents, and we've only had 2 women Speaker of the House. And that's got to change if we're ever going to change the face of leadership at our state level. If I was going to offer advice to a woman thinking about running for office, I think I would say start in your community, start in your own backyard, start by getting involved in something that makes a difference on a small scale because it will lead to something bigger. I serve with women in the legislature who got started because they worked on cleaning up a river or a pond in their town, or they worked on changing standards at their schools around kids and outdoor activity. Some of them are people who simply just got fed up with the fact that the person making the decisions for them in Augusta was not making decisions in the best interest of women and children across the state of Maine. So my advice to you watching this video, or to anyone, would be really identify a problem and then really engage in it. Engage in it in a way that is full of depth, not just breadth, so that you can understand something fully. Because when you have that experience, you'll be able to turn that into something larger and tackle bigger problems, whether they're the state budget or running your own campaign for office. And you'll always be able to draw on that experience to help you when things seem like the knots are too big to untie. You can go back to that original experience and say, how did I get that knot out? How did I untangle that one? The other thing I would advise, particularly women who are interested in running for office, is to be yourself. Don't apologize for being a woman. Don't apologize for being yourself. You really don't need to fit a mold that somebody else created. You can create your own mold, and I think sometimes we need to break the molds that are in place because they're outdated. When I think about young people also running for office, it's important that we remember young people are qualified too. And so as you look around in your communities looking for future leaders, don't necessarily just look for people who have already accomplished a lot or who are at the end of their career and then might run for office. Make sure you also look around for people who are just beginning, who've got the right approach and the right attitude and the right optimism about your community, that you could ask them to get involved or engage with them and help them get pointed in the right direction so that they can make a difference in running for office in your community and maybe in your own backyard. And there's so much potential out there and so many people who don't think they're qualified to run for office. And they're wrong. Because if they care about something, if you care about something, then you've got what it takes as long as you fit those basic requirements in your community of citizenship and residency and age for your constitution. So I think we are at a place, a tipping point almost, where women are coming up in colleges and universities, coming up in the number of people in the population. But there is a glass ceiling in politics that we haven't broken yet. And that's both in the number of women participating and seeing women at the highest possible levels, because that's when we're really going to make a change, when we can have young girls and young women saying, of course I could be president of the United States someday. We've had a woman president. I could do that too. And for me, right here in the state of Maine, this is about making sure Maine is setting an example. Maine is leading when it comes to women in politics. And we have first woman elected to the United States Senate in her own right was Margaret Chase Smith, a very famous woman senator from Maine, the first woman in the United States Senate. Her very famous Declaration of Conscience speech during the McCarthy era has her as an icon for the United States, not just Maine. And recently we've had Susan Collins, we've had Olympia Snow, Shelley Pingree. We've had women serve us very well in Washington, and we need more of them. We need more of them in Maine, more of them across the country, and maybe you or someone you know can be a part of that. When I think about what has made the biggest difference for me in moving forward in politics. It is often the least political things. It is the fact that I had a supportive family that said, of course you can try that. Of course, just do it. Never said, well, you really shouldn't do that. They always said, you just go give it a try. I have had supportive friends. I've had supportive colleagues. But I also think there's something really rooted in a person's role models and how they can see themselves through other people. And mentors make a huge difference. And for me, not just in my family, but also through teachers that I had, whether it was my music teacher or professors in college who said, of course you can do that. Just give it a try. Worst thing that can happen, Emily, is you might fail, and then you can try again. So we need to make sure more women are participating in politics, more young people. We need to make sure they are participating in a way that is based on issues and getting things done, not about just being in politics or getting elected. We need to make sure you who are watching this video are people who are ready to say yes when you're asked to run for office, and even more than that, make sure that you are someone who thinks of it and says, I could make a difference doing that, and maybe I should be the one to run for office. We need to change this paradigm. We need to bend this curve in a new direction. And that doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen when a lot of people start thinking in the same direction. So that's why I'm excited about what I do. That's why I love what I do. And I hope that by sharing a little bit of stories like this, that more people will be inclined to say yes when the opportunity to run for office comes their way. Thank you.